Reid, welcome to the program. Thank you so much indeed for your time. How much of the sanctions hurting now? How much more are they going to hurt in months to come?
It's a great question. They've already started to bite, as you mentioned at the opening, with the even having rationing of staples at the current time, but it's only going to get worse. The Russian economy has really been pulled out of the larger global economy, and it's going to be years, maybe decades, before the country fully recovers. And that's assuming Russia stops its activity right now and sanctions go away. There's still going to be way too much risk for multinational businesses to do business in Russia if they think that the Russian government might do something that creates this threat that the Russian economy becomes a pariah.
You know, sanctions have been imposed for decades, and so many analysts say, oh, they don't really work. They really hit the everyday citizen more than they can change the course of a government's decided action. But do you think that the level of sanctions that are being imposed, and bear in mind, of course, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said just 24 hours ago, look, we have plenty more options to impose more punishment on Russia. Will the country's economy shrink so significantly that it will have an impact on political decisions made in the Kremlin?
It's hard to tell. So the unfortunate side effect of sanctions is that they do affect the population. And even though policymakers try to target sanctions so that they will allow for food and medicine to get through into the country that's being sanctioned, there's still such a reduction in economic activity, it hurts everyone. But whether or not the government changes is, in Russia, a little bit difficult because the people, they do vote, but it's not clear that that vote has much of an effect on whether or not the people in power in the Kremlin remain in power. And it really is going to be difficult unless and until there's a change in that government for any countries to back away from the sanctions they've already put, and they may put more, as you said.
How difficult is it going to be for the Russian government to counter the effects? So there's some areas where it can find possible alternative trade partners. Many people are thinking that it's going to turn to China to bail itself out. Are there areas where it simply can't because of how much it trades with the West regarding certain things, like obviously we're thinking mostly about energy here, that the Kremlin will have no choice but to accept that pain?
I think that's right. I think that that there may be some mitigation of the effect by some dealing with China. I think China may quietly transact with Russia, but I don't think it's going to declare itself as a friend of Russia and help it out in any obvious way. I think there's too much risk for Chinese banks to deal with Russian banks, and they see where the clear economic decision is. Do you want to go in the trenches with Russia, or do you want to join with the rest of the world? And so I don't think for China there's much of a decision there, at least economically. For Russia, I don't know that there's any way around the sanctions because the economy is so interconnected now. And Russia, there was this fortress Russia where Putin had built up a certain foreign exchange reserve. But as soon as the Bank of England and the U.S. Treasury and the Bank of the EU cut off ties with the Central Bank of Russia, all of those foreign exchange reserves were just notes on paper, and they got a line scratched through them. So they no longer are there to help Russia out now, and they can't exchange internationally.
OK, so here's a personal take. My dad's wife was working in Moscow at the time that Boris Yeltsin was in power, when he stood on that tank and the White House, the main government building in Moscow, was being attacked. She said when she used to come out of the Moscow metro, there were a line of old women. One would be holding a tin of tomatoes, as you would say, right? We'd say tomato, say, please buy this. One would be holding a fish and say, please buy this. So I've read one analysis that says if the West can entirely extricate itself from its relationship with Russian energy, the Russian economy could shrink by as much as 25%. Are we looking then at almost widespread poverty in Russia if that were to happen?
I can't think how it wouldn't be the case. I mean, domestic Russian transactions can still happen, and you'll see the targets of the sanctions were only certain banks, so that small mom and pop shops or individuals could work with their banks. They could only have rubles, and as you pointed out, the ruble's dependent on Russia's interactions with the rest of the world, so its value has crashed, which means inflation will go shooting up, and things will, basics of life will become more difficult to come by. The kind of shrink of the economy that you're talking about will necessarily have an impact across the population, unfortunately, and hopefully that population can affect changes in the leadership that, whether they're people or the decisions that somehow allow Russia to open itself up a little bit more to the rest of the world by changing its policies.
Reid, really appreciate the time. Thank you so much indeed. Reid Whitten from the law firm Sheppard Mullin.
My pleasure. Thank you.